That's the fat S we have to put up with. Those were the exact words my own daughter Harper Carter screamed across the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in New York City, pointing straight at me as if I were trash left on the curb. 300 guests turned their heads, their designer gowns glittering under the chandeliers, their laughter sharp and merciless. The champagne glasses froze mid-air as the sound of cruel amusement rolled through the room like thunder. My cheeks burned crimson, my hands trembling as I clutched the tiny wrapped gift I had spent hours preparing. In that moment, I wished the marble floor would split open and swallow me whole. But then, something happened. Richard Whitmore, the groom's father, a man in a bespoke black suit, respected in every corner of Wall Street, suddenly stopped laughing. His glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the polished floor. His eyes locked onto my face with an expression of absolute shock. "Wait," he whispered, stepping closer, his voice shaking. "Aren't you R.K. Ellison?" If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has traveled. The grand ballroom of the plaza was a palace of glass and gold. Chandeliers rained diamonds across the marble floor. Violins played from a balcony wrapped in roses. Everywhere I looked, it was wealth showing off its power, its elegance, its arrogance. And in the middle of it all stood me, Maggie Carter, 64 years old, wearing a faded wine-colored dress I had found at a thrift store on Queens Boulevard. My shoes squeaked with every step, betraying me like old friends who had turned against me. I could feel the perfume-soaked women shifting in their gowns, whispering behind jeweled fingers, their eyes slicing me open. Harper, my only daughter, glowed in her designer gown, diamonds sparkling in her hair. She laughed with her new husband, Ethan Whitmore, as if I were not her mother but some intruder who had crashed this cathedral of privilege. But I was no stranger to being invisible. For 30 years, after my husband's death, I scrubbed the offices of Manhattan before dawn. I rode 3 separate trains through the darkness, carrying a thermos of black coffee and the smell of bleach on my hands. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens where the paint peeled from the walls and the heater coughed in the winter. To Harper, I was shame itself. Rough palms, second-hand clothes, the woman who counted every penny before daring to buy bread. She despised me for the same hands that had once braided her hair, the same tired arms that worked double shifts so she could go to school. And now, in this temple of chandeliers and champagne, my own daughter had chosen to expose me like an animal dragged into the light. But what Harper, and none of these 300 guests, could possibly imagine, was that the very woman they laughed at, the woman holding a small trembling gift wrapped in cheap paper, had built an empire large enough to own the floor beneath their polished shoes. Richard Whitmore had always been the type of man who commanded a room without raising his voice. Tall, silver-haired, his bespoke black suit cut so sharply it looked like it could draw blood. He was the definition of old New York power. For decades, his presence had meant deals were sealed, competitors folded, and employees scrambled to impress. Tonight, he had been basking in the glow of his only son's wedding, his glass of champagne glittering in the ballroom light. He had laughed along when Harper humiliated me. He had even let out a low, mocking chuckle, the kind powerful men use when they believe the joke is at someone else's expense. But then, something shifted. The laughter of the room seemed to fade for him alone. He leaned forward, squinting at me across the polished marble, his glass slipping slightly in his hand. The laughter of the guests swirled like smoke, but Richard's eyes had locked onto mine, sharp, calculating, uncertain. I froze under his gaze, my small gift box trembling in my hands. He knew. Or at least, some part of him thought he knew. I watched the color drain from his face as if he had just seen a ghost from a war he thought he had long survived. "Wait," he muttered, his voice just barely louder than a breath, but in the sudden hush of the ballroom, the word cut through the air. He took one step forward, then another, his polished shoes echoing across the floor. The crowd parted instinctively, like the Red Sea opening, their curiosity piqued, their cruelty momentarily silenced. Harper, still smiling in cruel triumph, noticed his hesitation. "Mr. Whitmore?" she asked nervously, her manicured hand brushing his sleeve. He didn't answer. His eyes were still locked on me, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Aren't you?" His words faltered. He swallowed hard, suddenly unsure whether to continue. His hand shook slightly as he lowered the broken glass stem onto a nearby tray. His voice dropped, but every person in that glittering hall strained to hear it. "Aren't you? R.K. Ellison." The name fell like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The orchestra faltered, the violins screeching to a halt. A murmur rippled through the 300 guests, first confusion, then disbelief, then the electric tension of gossip about to explode. Harper blinked, her smile collapsing. "What? Who?" she scoffed, laughing too loudly, too artificially. "This is my mother. My janitor mother. Don't be ridiculous." But Richard wasn't laughing. He reached into his jacket with trembling fingers, pulling out his phone. He tapped furiously, scrolling, searching, his breath growing uneven. The glow of the screen illuminated his ashen face. He stopped on an email, his eyes widening as he turned the phone toward me, then back to the stunned audience. On the screen was a digital signature, one that had haunted his nights since the day his empire nearly collapsed. R.K. Ellison. The mysterious investor who had swept in 2 weeks earlier with an offer too generous to refuse, buying a controlling 51% of Whitmore Holdings. His voice cracked as he whispered again, louder this time, so the whole room could hear. "It's her. My God. It's her." A collective gasp erupted. The cruel laughter that had filled the room only moments before turned into a chorus of stunned disbelief. Guests craned their necks, desperate to see me more clearly. The whispers grew sharp, slicing through the silence. R.K. Ellison. The one who bought the company. But she looks like a cleaning lady. How is this possible? I could feel hundreds of eyes burning into me, each one reevaluating every detail. The faded dress, the trembling hands, the wrinkled face. To them, I had been nothing more than Harper's embarrassing mother. But now, with just a name spoken aloud, I had become something else entirely. A puzzle piece that didn't fit, a mystery that could destroy reputations in a single stroke. Harper's cheeks drained of color. She glanced at Ethan, then back at her father-in-law. "Mr. Whitmore, you must be mistaken. She cleans buildings. She takes buses. She doesn't even own a car." Her voice cracked with desperation. But Richard didn't hear her. He stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, the kind that cost more than my monthly rent. His eyes searched my face with the frantic precision of a man piecing together a nightmare he hoped wasn't real. "The eyes," he whispered. "The voice. I heard it on those conference calls. You." He stopped himself, clenching his jaw. Then louder for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize who this is?" The ballroom fell into a suffocating silence. The chandeliers seemed to flicker. People leaned forward, their breaths shallow, their curiosity clawing at the edges of the room. Richard's hand trembled as he pointed toward me, his voice heavy with awe and disbelief. "This woman is Rowan K. Ellison, the very person who now owns Whitmore Holdings." Gasps. Murmurs. One woman covered her mouth with her gloved hand. Another dropped her champagne flute, the glass shattering against the marble. And in that frozen moment, with 300 people staring at me in stunned silence, I, Maggie Carter, the invisible woman, the janitor mother, the one they had laughed at, stood perfectly still, clutching my cheap little gift. Because whether I spoke or not, the truth had already shattered the room. My name is Maggie Carter, though to the world I have always been nobody. For the last 3 decades, I have lived like a shadow in the city that never sleeps. After my husband died in a construction accident when Harper was barely 12, the world simply stopped caring about us. One day I was a wife, the next I was just another widow trying to keep the lights on in a rented apartment in Queens where the paint peeled in long strips from the walls. Every night at 10 p.m., while the city's bright towers glowed like palaces, I tied my hair back, slipped on my cheap sneakers, and headed into Manhattan. I cleaned the offices other people abandoned. I polished the marble floors they strutted across. I emptied the trash cans filled with the remnants of lives so far above mine they might as well have been gods. I took 3 different trains just to get to work. I carried a thermos of bitter black coffee because it was cheaper than buying it. My hands cracked from bleach, my knuckles red and raw in the winter. I wore the same thrift store coat year after year, patching the sleeves until even the patches wore thin. To Harper, I was shame personified. She hated my uniform that smelled of disinfectant. She hated the calluses that made my touch rough. She hated introducing me at school events, always shifting away, embarrassed to admit I was her mother. She never knew that while I scrubbed those offices, I was also listening. I listened to men in tailored suits who stayed late, shouting into phones about mergers and bankruptcies. I listened to women in high heels pacing the halls, rehearsing pitches for billion-dollar deals. I listened, and I remembered. Every name. Every figure. Every mistake. At first, it was just noise, until one night, in the corner of a glass conference room, I overheard 2 executives whisper about a stock that was about to jump. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough. The next day, I scraped together $50. $50 I couldn't afford, and I bought that stock. When it doubled, I didn't celebrate. I was terrified. Terrified that if Harper knew, she would tell someone. Terrified that the world would notice me, and the fragile safety of invisibility would shatter. So I stayed quiet. I bought old finance books at garage sales for $1. I pulled discarded Wall Street journals from recycling bins. I studied in silence at my kitchen table until my eyes bled with exhaustion. Every night after scrubbing toilets and dusting boardrooms, I went home and studied balance sheets until dawn. Harper saw poverty. But beneath that, I was building something else. I invested again. Then again. I learned patience, discipline. While Harper mocked my thrift store shoes, I bought shares in companies no one believed in, companies that later rose from the ashes. While she rolled her eyes at my chipped mugs and empty fridge, I quietly signed my name onto deeds of small properties in struggling neighborhoods. Year after year, I lived the same routine: bleach, buses, and silence. But behind the curtain, my savings grew. My investments multiplied. And slowly, Maggie Carter the janitor became Rowan K. Ellison, the invisible investor. I lived 2 lives. By day, the poor mother my daughter despised. By night, the silent partner sitting at the edge of fortunes that men like Richard Whitmore thought they controlled. And still, Harper never knew. She only saw the cracked hands, the tired eyes, the old coat. She thought I was nothing. A failure. A burden. What she didn't know, what no one in that ballroom laughing at me could imagine, was that the invisible woman standing humiliated in a $30 dress had built an empire worth more than their entire family's fortune. And now, with Richard Whitmore's voice echoing my secret name across the plaza, the years of silence were over. For 3 decades, I had lived 2 lives. The world saw Maggie Carter, the woman scrubbing other people's mistakes off marble floors. But in the shadows, hidden behind dozens of signatures and sealed envelopes, I became someone else. Rowan K. Ellison, a name whispered in boardrooms, feared in markets, but never attached to a face. It began with scraps of knowledge, overheard while mopping conference rooms. A whispered tip, a name dropped too casually, a figure scrawled on a whiteboard before the lights went out. To most, these were fleeting fragments. To me, they were maps. I built a network of shell companies, paper-thin corporations in Delaware and Nevada, each one owning another, layered so deep that even forensic accountants would lose their way. I learned how to route money through trusts, how to bury profits under LLCs, how to disappear into the fine print. Every paycheck from my cleaning jobs went into this hidden world. At first, it was a trickle. $50 here, $100 there. But as my confidence grew, so did my risks. When others saw collapsing industries, I saw chances to buy. When neighborhoods rotted with boarded-up windows, I saw futures waiting to be rebuilt. While Harper sneered at my Goodwill dresses, I quietly bought my first rental property under a corporate alias. While she mocked the bus rides that stained my coat with winter slush, I was wiring money into companies everyone else had abandoned. For years I said nothing. Not when the dividends began to swell. Not when the balance sheets I once studied by candlelight started bending in my favor. Silence was my weapon. Invisibility was my shield. And then, 2 weeks before Harper's wedding, the moment arrived. Whitmore Holdings, Richard's empire, was drowning. Hidden beneath the glittering facade were lawsuits, unpaid debts, contracts teetering on the edge of collapse. I had been watching for months, tracing the cracks spreading through his kingdom like veins of rot. When the opportunity came, my legal team didn't hesitate. Through Ellison Capital, one of my faceless firms, I offered a lifeline, $45 million for controlling interest. To Richard, it was salvation. To me, it was strategy. But make no mistake, I didn't buy his company for numbers on a ledger. I bought it for the people. The clerks who would lose their homes. The janitors like me who would be laid off without severance. The secretaries who had spent decades building someone else's fortune, only to be discarded when the castle crumbled. I signed the deal in silence, my name appearing only as initials, R.K. Ellison. Richard never asked who sat on the other end of the table. To him, I was just another faceless investor, another shadow in the machine. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Until tonight. Until Harper's words ripped through the ballroom like knives, and Richard's glass slipped from his hand. Until the puzzle pieces I had spent years scattering began to snap together in front of 300 witnesses. They thought they saw a poor woman humiliated by her daughter. What they couldn't see, what they still couldn't comprehend, was the empire I had built brick by brick, deal by deal, all while wearing second-hand shoes. The silence in the room deepened, thick with unease. Richard's face had gone pale, his phone still glowing in his hand. Around us, whispers buzzed like hornets. R.K. Ellison. Here. But that's impossible. Why would she hide? They didn't understand that invisibility was not weakness. It was the reason I had survived. It was the reason I was standing here tonight with the power to decide the future of every Whitmore in this room. And soon, very soon, they would all know the cost of laughing at the woman they thought was nothing. Richard Whitmore's hand trembled as he held his phone aloft, the screen glowing like a shard of lightning in the darkened ballroom. Every eye followed his movement. The orchestra had fallen silent, even the chandeliers seemed to flicker under the weight of the moment. I could feel the heat of 300 stares drilling into me. Guests who had been laughing moments earlier now whispered behind jeweled hands, their expressions shifting from amusement to suspicion, suspicion to fear. Richard's voice cracked as he spoke, low at first, then rising with each word, the authority of decades in business suddenly unsteady. It's her. My God, it's her. The ballroom gasped as one, a sound like the air being sucked from a single lung. Harper froze, her triumphant smirk evaporating, her mouth hanging open. Dad. Ethan's voice was hushed, uncertain, but Richard ignored his son. His gaze was fixed solely on me, his breathing uneven, his jaw tightening as the pieces clicked together in his mind. He turned the phone toward the crowd. The glowing signature on the email was visible even from the back of the room. R.K. Ellison. 2 weeks ago, Richard said, his voice shaking but growing louder. This name appeared on a contract that changed everything. The mysterious investor who saved my company. The one who bought Whitmore Holdings for $45 million. He lowered the phone, his eyes boring into mine. That name belongs to her. A ripple tore through the crowd. Gasps, sharp intakes of breath, frantic whispers. No, impossible. But look at her dress, she's nothing. Why would someone so powerful hide like this? Harper staggered forward, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. Stop this, she shouted, her voice shrill, cracking. That's my mother. She cleans toilets for a living. She takes buses. She can't even pay her rent on time. Her desperation only fueled the fire. Guests who moments before had sneered now leaned forward, hungry for the scandal unfolding before them. The very humiliation Harper had intended for me was twisting, turning, devouring her instead. Richard didn't flinch. He stepped closer, so close I could see the sheen of sweat beading at his temples. His voice dropped, but the silence of the room made every word echo like a hammer. I know those eyes. I know that voice. I heard it on the calls. I saw it on the contracts. This woman, your mother, is Rowan K. Ellison. The ballroom exploded. Glasses shattered as someone dropped a tray. Women gasped, clutching their pearls. Men muttered curses under their breath. Camera phones rose into the air like a forest of accusing fingers, their red record lights blinking like watchful eyes. I stood frozen, clutching my little gift wrapped in cheap paper, my heart pounding so loudly I thought the chandeliers would shake. My life of silence, 30 years of carefully built invisibility, was being torn away in seconds, not by my choice but by the slip of a powerful man's tongue. Harper's scream pierced the noise. "You're lying. You have to be lying." She spun toward Ethan, her face pale, desperate. "Tell them, Ethan. Tell them she's nobody. Tell them." But Ethan's wide eyes betrayed him. His hand twitched at his tie, his lips parting but no words coming out. He looked at me the way a child looks at a storm. Fear, awe, helplessness. Harper's voice cracked into a sob. "She's my mother, for God's sake. She can't be the one." But the crowd no longer listened to her. Their focus was fixed on me, the janitor they had mocked, now unveiled as the invisible force who had seized one of the city's oldest empires. "Ms. Ellison," Richard said suddenly, addressing me not as Maggie, not as Harper's mother, but with a reverence that silenced even the whispers. "On behalf of my family, and the thousands of employees whose jobs you saved, thank you." The irony was thick enough to choke on. This man, who had laughed at me minutes earlier, now bowed his head ever so slightly, his trembling voice filled with respect. Gasps and murmurs surged again. "Respect," someone whispered in disbelief. "For her." Harper collapsed against a chair, her manicured fingers clutching the silk seat cover as if it could anchor her to the world she thought she owned. Her eyes darted between her father-in-law, her husband, and me, wild with fear. She had wanted a spectacle. My humiliation. But the spectacle had turned on her. In less than a minute, she had gone from the golden bride of the plaza to the daughter of the most dangerous woman in the room. The silence that followed was not the silence of ridicule but of dread, awe, and something Harper had never given me in her entire life: power. And for the first time that night, I let the corners of my lips lift, just slightly, into a smile. Because I knew, the game had only just begun. The ballroom still buzzed like a hive, 300 voices colliding in shocked whispers. But for me, the world narrowed into a single suffocating frame: my daughter's eyes. Harper's perfect mask was crumbling. The diamonds in her hair sparkled under the chandeliers, but her face was pale, twisted between disbelief and something darker. She stumbled toward me, her voice trembling, pitched too high. "Harper, tell me this isn't true. Tell them you're not Ellison. You're my mother, for God's sake. You take buses, you wear thrift store rags, you can't be the one they're talking about." I held her gaze, silent, the cheap gift box still trembling in my hands. Sometimes silence is sharper than any blade. Her panic morphed into suspicion. She lowered her voice, leaning closer so only I could hear. "Harper, or is it true? Did you hide all this from me? Did you let me live thinking you were pathetic while you built some secret empire?" Her words dripped with both accusation and hope, like a gambler clutching at cards she didn't believe in but desperately wanted to. I tilted my head, my voice calm, soft, almost maternal. "Maggie, Harper, do you really believe a woman who scrubs toilets for a living could ever be a millionaire?" The line hit her like a paradox. Her eyes darted across my face, searching for cracks, for something she could use. "Harper, don't play games with me. Mr. Whitmore recognized you. He said your name. He saw your signature. Why would he lie? I let a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Maggie, men his age sometimes see ghosts. A familiar face, a familiar voice, and suddenly they connect dots that were never meant to be connected. Her breath caught. For a moment, relief flickered in her eyes. Then doubt returned, fiercer. Harper. But you were there, weren't you? Cleaning those offices. Hearing their calls. Watching their meetings. You must have learned something. Did you use it? Did you? Her voice cracked under the weight of her own imagination. The thought terrified her and tempted her at the same time. I leaned closer, lowering my voice to a whisper sharp enough to slice. Maggie. What if I told you I know things that could never be written down? What if I told you that being invisible was the most powerful position of all? Her pupils widened, her breath shallow. I could see the battle inside her, denial warring with greed, shame colliding with desire. Harper. So you're saying it's true. You are Ellison. You bought Whitmore Holdings. You. I interrupted gently, deliberately. Maggie. I'm saying, perhaps Mr. Whitmore confused me with someone else. Or perhaps he recognized something on my face that reminded him of a business deal long ago. Does that make me Ellison? Or does it make me a shadow that looks familiar? She froze. The seed had been planted. A dangerous seed that would grow roots in her mind long after this night ended. Around us, the crowd continued buzzing, Richard still pale, Ethan hovering uncertainly. But in that moment, it was just mother and daughter, locked in a battle of words unsaid. Harper's lips trembled. She tried to mask her desperation with anger, but the cracks were too wide. Harper, if you really are who they say you are, then you let me humiliate you for years. You let me call you nothing. You let me. Her voice faltered, then sharpened. Unless you wanted this. Unless this was your plan all along. I didn't answer. I simply let the silence expand, let her drown in her own words. Because silence, I had learned, is not weakness. It's the most exquisite form of power. The murmurs in the ballroom grew louder, restless, a storm waiting to break. Harper's breath came in shallow bursts beside me, her painted smile long gone, her voice cracking under suspicion. But I had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. I placed the trembling gift box onto the nearest table and reached into my small handbag. My fingers brushed against papers I had carried for weeks. Like a soldier carrying concealed weapons no one suspected. When I pulled them out, thick envelopes, embossed with corporate seals, the noise in the ballroom fell into instant silence. The faint crinkle of paper seemed deafening. I spoke for the first time, my voice low, clear, steady. Maggie. For 30 years, I stayed invisible. Tonight, you all want to know the truth. Fine. Let's see how much truth you can handle. Gasps rippled through the room. Every camera phone turned toward me, every lens glowing red. The spotlight no longer belonged to Harper, or even Richard, it belonged to me. I laid the papers carefully onto the linen-draped table, sliding one page out for all to see. It bore a bold header. Acquisition contract, Whitmore Holdings. Buyer, R.K. Ellison Capital. Signed, Rowan K. Ellison. Richard staggered forward, his jaw tight, his voice raw. Richard. That's it. That's the document. The ballroom erupted in gasps again. Harper clutched her husband's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Harper. No. No, this can't. She's faking it. This has to be a trick. But I wasn't finished. From the envelope, I pulled a second document, bank transfer receipts, $45 million wired into Whitmore Holdings account. The numbers glowed under the crystal light, undeniable, irrefutable. I held them high. Maggie. This is not a story. This is not gossip. This is fact. The money that saved your empire came from me. And now, every reporter in this city has a copy of these documents. By morning, the New York Times will run the headline, Janitor turned empire builder buys Whitmore Holdings. The shockwave was nuclear. A collective intake of breath. Then chaos. Guests turned to one another, frantic, their voices colliding in disbelief. Phones lit up as some began dialing reporters already, their hungry eyes gleaming with scandal. Richard's face was pale, but beneath the fear, there was awe. He knew the story would explode far beyond this ballroom. But Harper's horror was pure survival instinct. Her world, built on image and reputation, was collapsing brick by brick. Harper, you'll ruin me. You'll ruin us. Do you understand what you're doing? I turned, my gaze cold, steady. Maggie. No, Harper. You ruined yourself the moment you pointed at me and called me a name in front of 300 people. You did that. Not me. Her lip quivered, but I didn't let her speak. I leaned closer, my voice sharp enough to cut marble. Maggie. And if you dare call me a liar again, I will do more than show papers. I will call the SEC myself. I will ask them to review every deal, every cent that touched Whitmore Holdings these past 5 years. Do you know what they'll find? Her face drained of all color. She knew the answer even before I gave it. Maggie. Shell accounts. Inflated invoices. Quiet debts swept under rugs. Your father-in-law knows it. Ethan suspects it. And if I choose to expose it, this entire family doesn't just lose money. They lose everything: reputation, freedom, legacy. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard lowered his gaze, unable to deny the truth. Ethan's knuckles whitened against his glass. Harper swayed as if the floor beneath her heels had vanished. And then I delivered the final blow. Maggie. So remember this moment. Remember this silence. Because from tonight forward, every breath you take, every step you make, you will ask yourself one question. Is she going to destroy us today? The ballroom held its breath. Cameras clicked, chandeliers trembled, and the tension was so thick it felt like glass about to shatter. I slid the documents back into the envelope with deliberate care, as if resealing a weapon. Then I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said this game is only beginning. 3 days passed. 3 long days where the ballroom whispers turned into citywide rumors, and the rumors grew into headlines. Mystery buyer of Whitmore Holdings. Could she be hiding in plain sight? The Times had not named me, but speculation was everywhere. And Harper could not stand it. On the 4th night, long after midnight, I heard the rattling of the old lock on my building's front door. The same lock that stuck every winter. The same lock Harper used to curse as a teenager when she came home too late. Now, it was cursing her back. I opened my apartment door before she even knocked. She stood there in the hallway, dripping with rain, her ivory cashmere coat soaked through, mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. Her stilettos clicked uselessly on the linoleum as she pushed past me, too frantic to care about the peeling paint on the walls. Harper. Mom, we have to talk. She collapsed onto my thrift store sofa, the same one she had once mocked as garbage furniture. Now her trembling hands clutched its faded armrest like it was her last anchor. I poured her tea, the same cheap black tea I had drunk every night for 30 years. She looked at the chipped mug with disgust, then desperation, then finally lifted it with both hands, as if even the smallest comfort was better than none. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Harper, I can't stop thinking about that night. About what you said. About what Mr. Whitmore said. Is it true, Mom? Are you really Ellison? Or are you just letting people believe you are? I sat across from her in my reupholstered chair, the one I'd rescued from a trash pile 15 years ago. My voice was calm, even. Maggie, does it matter which one is true? The question is, what do you believe? She flinched, as if the words struck her chest. Harper, I don't know what to believe anymore. You've lived like a ghost all my life, and now people are saying you're more powerful than Richard Whitmore himself. I leaned forward, letting the silence stretch until she squirmed. Maggie, power, Harper, doesn't come from money. It comes from letting people wonder what you're capable of. Her eyes shone with both awe and hunger. Then came the slip, the one I had been waiting for. Harper, if it is true, if you are Ellison, then why are we still living like this? Why am I drowning in debt while you sit here drinking tea in the dark? You could help me, Mom. You could fix everything. And there it was. The greed, bubbling beneath her desperation. I smiled faintly. Maggie. Help you? After you called me a fat stranger at your wedding? After decades of shame? Tell me, Harper, why would I? Her eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. Harper, because I'm your daughter. And because I was wrong. I was cruel. I was blind. But now I see who you really are. And I swear I'll change. Just, please, don't leave me behind. I let her words hang in the air, watching her twist in the silence. Then, slowly, I reached for an old shoebox I had kept under my desk. I placed it on the coffee table between us. Her eyes widened as I slid it open, revealing fragments, old documents, scraps of photographs, ledgers I had kept deliberately ambiguous. Not lies, not truth, just enough to fuel her obsession. Maggie, there are things I cannot tell you. Things that involve people more powerful than Richard Whitmore. But if you want answers, Harper, you'll have to prove you can handle them. She leaned forward, trembling, her hands hovering above the papers as if they were holy relics. Harper, what do I have to do? I closed the lid before she could touch them. Maggie, first, you have to decide whether you want a mother or a benefactor. Because you cannot have both. Her breath hitched, her eyes flashing with both terror and greed. And in that instant, I knew the game had shifted. Harper was no longer just my daughter, she was my opponent, trapped in a cage of her own desire. The night she left my apartment, Harper promised she would change. Promised she wanted me as her mother, not as her ticket out. But I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of greed smoldering under the ash of fear. And within days, her obsession began to bloom. She started showing up unannounced, at strange hours. Once at dawn, her designer heels clicking in the quiet hallway like accusations. Once at midnight, her silk blouse wrinkled, her hair undone, eyes red as if she hadn't slept in days. She would smile too sweetly, carrying flimsy excuses. Harper, I was just in the neighborhood, Mom. But her eyes betrayed her. They were never on me. They were always scanning my apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the old bookshelves, the shoebox I had deliberately left in plain sight. One afternoon, I found her standing at my desk, her fingers rifling through my scattered papers. She jumped when I entered, plastering a guilty smile. Harper, I was just looking for a pen. A lie so thin it dissolved in the air. But I said nothing. I let her look. Because sometimes, letting someone dig only makes them sink deeper into the trap. She became restless, fidgeting, tapping her manicured nails against the chipped mug I offered her. She asked questions that sounded casual but had been rehearsed. Harper, Mom, why do you have all these investment books? Why would someone like you read about stock markets, hedge funds, corporate law? Her voice carried an edge, sharp, hungry. I answered softly, shrugging. Maggie, because they were cheap at garage sales. And maybe I was curious. When you spend your life cleaning the offices of powerful men, sometimes you wonder how they built it all. Not a lie. But not the truth. Her paranoia grew by the day. She began following me. I caught sight of her reflection in bus windows, her car parked half a block down when I walked home from work. Once, I turned a corner and saw her duck clumsily behind a lamppost, her cashmere coat far too conspicuous for shadows. At night, my phone lit with her messages, first sweet, then sharp, then desperate. Mom, are you awake? Tell me the truth. Just tell me once and I'll stop asking. I need to know who you really are. She was unraveling. Neighbors whispered that they saw her waiting outside my building for hours, staring at the cracked brick facade as if it might speak to her. One rainy evening, I found her sitting on the steps, her makeup streaked, clutching a soggy notebook filled with scribbled names. Beaumont, Ellison, Whitmore, circled over and over like talismans. Her obsession was consuming her. She no longer laughed at dinner parties, no longer posted glossy photos of her perfect life. Her friends began to whisper. Harper looked haunted. Harper looked ill. And all the while, I said nothing. Because silence, again, was my weapon. I watched as she twisted every scrap of my life into theories. That I had hidden money offshore, that I was blackmailing powerful men, that I had been Rowan Ellison's mistress, or her ghost, or her secret twin. Every time she asked directly, I gave her the same answer, soft and maddening. Maggie, do you really believe a woman like me could ever be Ellison? It was enough to keep her spiraling, enough to keep her trapped in the labyrinth I had built with silence, half-truths, and shadows. But obsession has a breaking point. And Harper's came one cold Tuesday night, when she showed up trembling on my doorstep, not with questions, but with a confession. Her debts. Her desperation. Her fear of losing everything. The greed had turned into full-blown addiction. And now, she wanted the fix she thought only I could provide. Money. It was a Tuesday night, cold enough that the radiators in my building rattled like tired bones. I was setting my chipped mug on the table when I heard frantic knocking at my door. When I opened it, Harper stumbled in, her face streaked with tears, her coat still damp from the rain. She looked less like a bride and more like a child who had run too far from home. She didn't even sit down. She collapsed to her knees right on my threadbare rug, clutching my hands with manic desperation. Harper. Mom, I can't take it anymore. I need the truth. I need help. Her mascara left dark stains on my palms as she held them, trembling. I said nothing. I simply waited, knowing silence would draw out what she had been holding back. Her words spilled out in gasps, each one more desperate than the last. Harper. We're drowning, Mom. Ethan and I. We're ruined. The house, the cars, the jewelry, the wedding, everything was on credit. $600,000 in debt. Do you hear me? 600,000. Credit cards maxed out, mortgage past due, loans piling up. We can't breathe. Her voice cracked, breaking into sobs. Then came the plea, the moment I had known would come. Harper, you have to save us. If you really are Ellison, if you really bought Whitmore Holdings, then I know you have money. Just lend us what we need. I swear we'll pay you back. Please, Mom. Please. Her words clung to me like claws. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't asking to mend the years of cruelty. She was asking for money. I pulled my hands free and stood, watching her kneel on my rug like a supplicant at an altar. My voice was soft but heavy. Maggie, so that's why you came. Not for me. Not for truth. $4. She shook her head violently, tears flying. Harper. No. It's not like that. I regret everything I said at the wedding, every cruel thing I've ever done to you. But we're desperate. Ethan's father is finished. The creditors are circling. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything. Please, Mom. You're our only hope. Her words twisted like a knife, but I could see the flicker behind her tears. Greed. Desperation not just for survival, but for the taste of a life she believed she deserved. I paced slowly, deliberately, every step echoing in the small apartment. Maggie. Tell me something, Harper. If I truly had millions, if I truly were Ellison, would you be here because you love me, or because you love what I could give you? Her lips trembled. She tried to answer, but the truth was too heavy for her mouth. Instead, she whispered, broken. Harper. Does it matter? We need you. I need you. I let the silence linger, sharp and suffocating. Then I leaned down, my eyes locking onto hers. Maggie. It matters more than you will ever know. She sobbed harder, pressing her forehead into my knees, her once perfect hair falling in damp strands across the worn rug. Harper. Please, Mom. I'll do anything. Anything. Just help us. Save us. Don't let me lose everything. And in that moment, with my daughter crumbling at my feet, I realized the cruelest truth of all. Harper was no longer begging for forgiveness. She was bargaining for her future. Her greed had finally bloomed into desperation. And I, the invisible woman she had mocked all her life, now held the power to decide whether she would sink or be saved. Harper's sobs filled the tiny apartment, echoing off the peeling walls. She clutched my knees as though her life depended on it, her once polished nails digging into my skin. But I had waited 30 years for this moment. 30 years of silence, of invisibility, of humiliation. Tonight, I would not give her money. I would give her a choice. I stepped back, freeing myself from her grasp. She looked up at me with swollen eyes, streaks of mascara cutting black rivers down her cheeks. I walked to my desk, pulled out a folder, and set it on the table between us. The papers inside were real in form, false in purpose, drafted not to transfer money, but to test a soul. Maggie, you want help? Then you'll have it. But not as a gift. Not even as a loan. You will sign this. Harper's trembling hands seized the folder. She flipped open the first page, her eyes widening at the bold letters across the top. Conditional Financial Transfer Agreement. Her lips moved as she read aloud, her voice breaking. Harper, Clause 1. Complete transfer of all personal assets, including house, cars, jewelry, into Maggie Carter's name as collateral guarantee. She gasped, snapping her eyes up at me. Harper, you want me to give you everything? My home. My life. I said nothing. I let the silence cut deeper than words. Her fingers shook as she turned the page. Harper, Clause 2. Immediate relocation to a city chosen by Maggie Carter. Limited family contact for 5 years. Her face blanched. Harper, 5 years? You'd exile us? You'd tear me away from my friends, from everything I know. I leaned forward, my voice calm, unflinching. Maggie, money buys survival, Harper. But survival without humility is worthless. Consider it. Probation. Her lips quivered as she turned to the last page. Then she froze. Her voice dropped to a whisper, trembling with disbelief. Harper, Clause 3. Voluntary renunciation of all future inheritance rights. Tears spilled from her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of fury. Harper, you want to cut me out completely. You want me to sign away everything that should be mine. I stood, my shadow falling across her like a judgment. Maggie, nothing is yours, Harper. Not respect. Not love. Not even money. You threw those away when you chose cruelty. This is your only chance to prove you can be more than greed. She slammed the folder shut, her chest heaving. Harper, this isn't a contract. It's punishment. It's revenge. I let her words hang in the air. Then, softly, I asked, Maggie, or is it redemption? The silence between us was suffocating. Harper clutched the folder to her chest, her knuckles white, her body trembling with rage and desperation. Behind her, the rain lashed against the window like fists. The room felt smaller, tighter, every second stretching like an eternity. Finally, she whispered, broken. Harper, if I sign this, will you save me? I looked at her, my daughter, my betrayer, my blood, and felt the weight of 30 years pressing on my heart. Maggie, if you sign this, you will have a mother again. If you refuse, you will have nothing. Choose. Harper. Tonight. Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled. And in that fragile moment, with the contract between us like a blade, I knew the truth. This was no longer about money. This was about the soul of my daughter. 6 months later, the winter snow had melted from the cracked sidewalks of Queens. The radiator in my apartment no longer rattled, because I no longer lived there. For the first time in 30 years, I allowed myself to move into a space that reflected who I truly was. a quiet penthouse overlooking Central Park, filled not with extravagance, but with light. And Harper? She signed the contract. Her hands trembled as she wrote her name, her tears staining the page. I didn't rejoice when she did. It wasn't victory I felt. It was sorrow. Sorrow that my daughter's desperation had finally outweighed her pride. In the months that followed, Harper and Ethan sold their mansion, their cars, their jewelry. They moved into a modest apartment in Boston, far from the glittering towers of Manhattan. For the first time, Harper lived without servants, without luxury, without applause. She worked as a receptionist at a medical clinic. Ethan found work as an assistant accountant. At first, she raged. She called me cruel. She called me heartless. But slowly, her calls changed. She began to ask different questions. Not about money, but about life. Mom, how did you stay disciplined when the world laughed at you? Mom, how do you know when to trust someone again? Mom, how do I stop feeling like nothing without things? And for the first time in decades, I felt like a mother again. It wasn't perfect. Old wounds don't heal in months. Sometimes, I still see the girl who once pointed at me in a ballroom and called me a name. Sometimes, I still see the greed flicker in her eyes. But I also see something else. Humility. Effort. The beginnings of change. The world never found out the whole truth. Some believed the rumors, some dismissed them as legend. I let them wonder. Because invisibility had always been my greatest strength. But Harper knew. And now every choice she made, every shift she worked, every dollar she earned without credit, was haunted by the knowledge that her mother, the woman she once despised, had held the power to save her all along. Did I forgive her? Not completely. Forgiveness is not a moment. It is a road you walk every day. But I gave her something better than money. The chance to prove who she could become. And that is what I want to leave with you. Because maybe, in your own life, someone has underestimated you. Maybe you've been invisible, mocked, dismissed, humiliated. Or maybe, you've been the one doing the mocking. Maybe you've taken love for granted, assuming it would always be there, no matter how cruel you were. But here's the truth I learned. Money can rebuild houses, but only humility can rebuild relationships. So ask yourself, if you had to choose between love and wealth, between family and greed, what would you pick? Because in the end, real wealth isn't measured in millions. It's measured in who stands beside you when everything else is gone. And that's the story I leave you with tonight.